This is Jilliana back with part 3. Please go ahead.
Okay.
I've forgotten what we were talking about.
You've forgotten. I forgot to. No. So basically, I became an osteopath in 1980, and actually started to practice very successfully in Fulham, and within 6-7 months, I think I had a full list. So I was really very busy. So we were in the sort of height of the popularity of osteopathy, and I was a cranial osteopath actually.
Yes.
So
couldn't have been too many of you around.
There weren't, which was great. So anyway, I became quite successful and well known, but I was always sort of slightly, always wondering, what's next? What is it that I don't understand? And I started actually to get involved, and had been involved in kinesiology. So I sort of met a whole lot of different people. They taught me a little.
Which was not accepted by the medical profession.
And still isn't actually.
No.
In effect. And I'll explain a little bit more about that. But so what happened was that a chap came over called John Bandy from America. He was a chiropractor. And he did a demonstration using mudras, using finger positions.
Yeah.
So he was putting
from India.
Well, don't worry about whether they're from England, from India or not. But he was doing handmade, and what was happening was that the subject, i.e., the client he was working with, as he put different mudras into his hand, his muscles would change, and so this sort of totally excited us. So suddenly there was this supposed language that we were being shown. He said, well, actually, I'm not the master. He said, there's a man called Alan Beardall, who's another chiropractor. American, who lived in Portland in Oregon. So we got Alan over to England, and he started to teach us his work, which is called clinical kinesiology. And this is the use of kinesiology and mudras. So mudras are a gesture-driven language. So a gesture is, what I'm doing with my hands. There are different gestures that you can do that feed back into what's called the somatosensory cortex, and then from the somatosensory cortex it goes into the thalami, into the lower nuclei, then down through your nervous system to your whole body. So what's actually happening is that we think that a mudra holds in itself a sort of spatial dynamic of your entire body. So for example, if I hold it deep inside me a feeling of hate or a feeling of anger, my structure, my soma, would contract into a particular formation or state. And what we think happens, well, I'm not totally sure, is that the mudras hold in themselves this dynamic of what's actually happening in the whole system. And so when a mudra in your hand meets your brain, and your brain says, yes, this is my internal state, there is a change in the musculature. So basically we were being taught a feedback mechanism, and that the mudras themselves contained a language.
So this would be good for stress, wouldn't it?
Oh, for everything actually.
Yeah.
Everything.
Yeah.
So what happened was that we were taught by Alan for a long time, then tragically he was killed in 1986.
Was this the reason that you went to live in Portland, Oregon?
Not quite, no, not quite, but eventually. No, he came over to teach us in England. Had gone to a friend of mine in Wales, or Herefordshire actually, and had been killed in a car crash, unfortunately. And I was fortunate enough to talk to him, I think probably 10 minutes before he died, to say thank you, actually. And I was notoriously bad at sort of saying thank you to anyone in those days. So this was a sort of remarkable thing for me to actually acknowledge his work and what he'd given to me. And then, consequently to that, I had a whole lot of series of processes that went on inside me where I started to receive mudras myself. So I would have direct feeling of this mudra coming into my body and coming and changing my finger positions to produce a new mudra.
It's always the hands, is it?
It's always the hands. Sometimes it's a whole body posture, but normally the hands. And I suppose in the next 3-4 years, I received maybe 1,500, something like that, mudras, and I've got about 2,200 mudras and body posture things now.
Have
many
you
years later.
photographed all
Oh,
these?
yes, everything's catalogued, everything's written down.
Is it in a book?
It's not in a book, it's in a database. I teach this all over the world, have taught it all over the world.
Oh, you should put it in a book.
I perhaps will one day. And anyway, so what happened was that I started to see that these mudras were, yes, a language, and that they contained different types of language. So some mudras acted like a switch, other mudras pointed to a particular structure of the body, other mudras talked about consciousness, other mudras talked about, when I say talked about, they held within themselves a nuance of that particular aspect of our being. So it was a huge language, a sort of lexicon of different concepts were encapsulated into the mudras that I received. And as I started to work with it, I started to see that I was being given a body of work. And ultimately this body of work is now called Inner Dialogue. Mm-hmm. So Inner Dialogue is a way that we...
Which you've got a trademark on, I noticed.
Yes, indeed, yes. And have taught it relatively successitely, not all over the world, but in places
when did you start to do that? What year?
In 1990, well, actually probably about 88. Really,
quite a while ago.
Quite a long time ago, yeah. Really started in earnest at about 91. Eventually went to Russia, taught there. So taught in Russia, taught in Austria, taught to a lesser degree in Canada, in America, in England.
Who were you teaching to? Would they be therapists,
yes,
doctors?
Yes, all sorts actually. Lay people, as well as doctors, chiropractors, osteopaths, acupuncturists.
Professional people.
Professional people, and non-professional, I might say, because they're actually equally able to learn this language and learn the techniques that are associated with it, because there are techniques which are therapeutic. So as an osteopath, I taught a form of osteopathy called cranial fluid dynamics. As an acupuncturist, I created, using mudras, a form of traditional Chinese medicine, but actually based on an ontological approach. So all of the work is ontological in its nature, meaning that we use the mudras to ascertain what is present in a human being and what is contingent. So obviously we have the idea that there are certain things that should be present in a body, but there are contingencies that actually prevent those qualities or virtues from not manifesting in the body. And what we found with these virtues or contingencies were if you like, the sort of the dynamic that actually creates health, creates well-being. And when those are missing in a human being, that's when we start to get sick. So our work is really about looking at the state of being of a human, to encourage these qualities, these resources, which are can be encapsulated in the idea of the caduceus. The caduceus is the symbol of medicine, and the caduceus is a symbolic representation of a human being. So you have a straight line, which is what we call integrity, but it's also about truth and contact and being present and being connected to heaven and connected to earth and connected to the other. Then there's the snake around the central pole.
Yeah, sure.
That's to do with what we call flexibility, which is life itself. It's the feminine principle. It's expansive and contractile. It widens our consciousness. It opens us up to change. It's a plasticity. So, of course, if we're missing that in our lives, then our structure is not plastic and not flexible, and therefore we get sick and ill and etc., etc. And then there is, as you know, in the caduceus, there's a pair of wings, and the wings are to do with light. So the idea that actually we're illuminated by our consciousness, we're illuminated by spirit, by grace, by the Holy Spirit, we're illuminated by the other, illuminated by the spirit or the ruh of a human being. And that allows us to see why we get sick or dysfunctional or not work properly in our lives.
Okay, right. Thank you very much.
My pleasure.
Shall we continue for another one?
Why not?
Okay, then we'll be doing part 4 in a moment.